2:48 p.m. on the 30th of March 1979, a bomb planted by a distant Irish Republican faction, the INLA, exploded under the car of Eirey Neave MP, the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, as he drove up the ramp from the underground car park beneath the Palace at Westminster. He died shortly after of his horrendous wounds at the Westminster Hospital. The murder dominated the news for a number of days and forever set Neave in the minds of the British public as the shadow cabinet minister who was assassinated. I remember that day well. I came home from school in time to watch the BBC live coverage of the event, and I remember seeing the car being removed and driven around on a flatbed lorry covered by a tarpaulin as it left Parliament Square. Why should Conservatives be interested in Eirey Neave almost 40 years after his death? Well, for a start, without his skillful handling of the 1975 Conservative leadership contest, it's very unlikely that Margaret Thatcher would have come to power in the first place.
And just out of the blue, Airey came to me one day in the House of Commons and said, have you got anyone organising your campaign? I said, good heavens, no. Organising it? You don't push yourself. It's a matter for other people. And he said, well, I think I'd better take it over then, don't you? And I said, well, I'd be delighted. Just like that.
Now, I understand that you ran a very discreet campaign, what's been described as a kind of Colditz campaign on behalf of Mrs. Thatcher, so that Mr. Heath's camp didn't really know what had hit them until it was too late. Is that true?
I think it's entirely true. I think it was very important with a new candidate when the establishment of the Conservative Party were organising in support of the leader, which was very proper for them to do, that I should run a very discreet campaign among the backbenches. And we did this quietly and discreetly. It resembles Colditz in the sense that one had to be careful what one was doing.
Secondly, he was, in the words of Margaret Thatcher, staunch, brave, true and strong as a personality. But more importantly, he was a man of action and significant heroism. These are rare qualities indeed, especially in a politician. Eirey Neave was born in London on the 23rd of January 1916. His father, Sheffield Eirey Neave, was an entomologist. It would seem that he was certainly born into a comfortably well-off family who were able to invest in their son's education at Eton and later Merton College, Oxford. Neave believed from the early 1930s that the advent of Adolf Hitler would result in another war between Britain and Germany. As a student, he'd visited Nazi Germany, and there exists an amusing anecdote of him being reluctantly encouraged by a group of local sports club enthusiasts to take part in one of their parades down the Unter den Linden, to listen to some Nazi equivalent of a sports minister orating from a dais at the end of the route. Neave, dressed casually and therefore wholly inappropriately, humorously ridiculed the Nazi nabob to the fear and consternation of the people who had invited him. Eirey Neave joined the combined cadet force at Eton College and then later served in the Territorial Army as a second lieutenant in the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry. After university, in 1938, he transferred his officer's commission to the Royal Engineers, but was actually sent to France in February 1940 with the 1st Searchlight Regiment of the Royal Artillery. And so it came to pass that he was on the ground as part of the British Expeditionary Force when the phony war phase ended and the Wehrmacht came crashing into France in May 1940. Now, at this stage, I think it's only fair to tell you that part of the reason for giving this little talk today is to encourage you to track down copies of Eirey Neave's 4 volumes of war memoirs. I read them in the 1980s when I was a student, and I have to say, I'm not certain if they're currently in print. I certainly have no personal financial interest in these particular volumes, but I guarantee that if you track them down, they will take you on an amazing journey through World War II in Europe. In the first volume, The Flames of Calais, Neave is wounded in the battle for that Channel port and is taken captive in a prison of war by the Germans. Pretty much from the start, Eirey Neave is devising plans to escape from captivity. The second volume of his war memoirs is entitled They Had Their Exits and tells the story of his time in Colditz and his eventual achievement of a distinction of being the first Briton to escape from the prison camp and make a successful home run. Airey Neave made his first attempt to escape dressed as a German soldier in August 1941. The uniform that he manufactured from an old Polish army tunic and resplendent with a cardboard belt was so physically authentic that when he was recaptured by the Germans, they marvelled at his ingenuity and took a photograph of him in the uniform. This photograph still exists. When he returned to the castle, one of his Allied comrades made a joke of all this by saying that he hoped he'd learned his lesson. Neave said that he had. The next time he would escape dressed as a German officer. And that's exactly what he did do in January 1942, when he walked out the gate in the company of a Dutch prisoner, Anthony Lutain. The story of their escape and evasion as they crossed Germany to the Swiss border is an exciting one, and I would encourage all Conservatives to get hold of a copy if they have their exits. There are tales of them hiding out in newsreel cinemas in the day and travelling through the night. Lutain, the Dutchman, does most of the talking for the pair, as his German language skills are superior to that of his English friend. This is just as well, as when they both eventually cross the border by night, Neave stops to ask an old man on the cart which country they're in. The cartman unhesitatingly replies, "You're in Switzerland, Englishman." Airey Neave returned to Great Britain in April 1942, and a month later was awarded the Military Cross. The third volume, Saturday at MI9, deals with his subsequent career as a wartime British intelligence officer at MI9, the department set up to assist with the running of Allied prisoner escape lines in occupied Europe. Almost 10 years after the war, Neave would write another book entitled Little Cyclone, in tribute to one of the women that ran one of these amazing underground lines. The final volume of Airey Neave's war quartet of memoirs is entitled Nuremberg, and this covers the time when he was working on the staff of the International Military Tribunal. Significantly, he was the lawyer who served copies of the individual indictments detailing the charges on each of the accused at the main trial. He met the likes of Goering, Ribbentrop, Stryker, and Rosenberg, Hess, and Speer, face to face, and he was therefore able to make a personal assessment of the character of each of these different people. He, for one, was not impressed with the personality of Albert Speer and regarded much of his behaviour as a performance. Airey Neave left the armed forces as Lieutenant Colonel with an OBE for military service and a United States Bronze Star. He returned to the English bar and chambers in the Inner Temple, but his heart was not really in the law. Legal colleagues used to say that he was always seeking a parliamentary constituency. Neave joined the Conservative Party and fought Thurrock in the general election of 1950, and Ealing North in the general election of 1951. Needless to say, both attempts were unsuccessful. However, it was a case of third time lucky for our hero, and he finally entered Parliament as the Honourable Member for Abingdon in Oxfordshire in 1953. His first few years in Parliament were ones of constant but slow progress in politics. But then disaster struck in 1959 when Airey Neave experienced a massive heart attack. In fairness, this tough army man had enjoyed both the drink and the smoke in the past, and it put him out of action for a while. After weeks of convalescence, he returned to the House of Commons, only to be told by the Conservative Party Chief Whip, one Edward Heath, that his career in frontline politics was at an end as a result of his health condition. Just imagine how that went down. Well, it seems that the future Prime Minister had made a big mistake, and Neave would surprise him in the years to come. Throughout the 1960s, Airey Neave worked from the backbenches of the House of Commons, representing both his constituents and championing the pension rights of war widows. He did a lot of good work in this regard, but he was not perceived as belonging to any particular faction within the parliamentary party. In short, he kept his head down. In 1975, following two general election defeats in succession under Edward Heath's leadership, the old warrior awoke from his slumbers. Determined that Heath had to go, he started looking around for a successor to promote. Keith Joseph, Edward Buchan were both considered, but eventually he would become Margaret Thatcher's campaign manager. The stories of his brilliant handling of his fellow members of Parliament in this contest are still legend in the British Conservative Party. Quite simply, this former intelligence officer was adept of speaking to MPs in such a way as to secure their vote for the lady. Many favoured a different candidate, but they were told and persuaded by Airey Neave to cast their vote for Margaret Thatcher in order to open the field to other candidates on the second ballot. He knew full well that by doing so he would remove Heath in the first ballot and put his candidate Margaret Thatcher so far ahead on the second vote so as not to be caught by any of the late entrants to the race. Airey Neave's award for managing Margaret Thatcher's leadership campaign was his choice of a shadow cabinet portfolio. Neave's choice was Northern Ireland. Why? Well, because Britain at that time was in the thick of a terrorist war, and also he thought he could fight with greater insight and gusto. Also, Neave was a great patriot, regarding Ulster as British and supporting political integration of the province into the mainland political structure. For these skills and opinions, he sadly lost his life. Conservatives should look at Neave afresh, read his books, appreciate his courage, his analytical skills and his political conviction. He is, in my opinion, one of the most significant British Conservatives of the post-war era and should be an inspiration for all of us. He truly lived a heroic life.
You've been listening to the Bruges Group series Eminent Thatcherites. Tune in for our next edition on Ian Gow, another eminent Thatcherite.